They thought the black kid was guilty, until he opened his mouth in court. The soft hum of the ceiling fan barely masked the courtroom's low buzz. It was just past 8:30 a.m. in Juvenile Courtroom 3B at the Cook County Juvenile Justice Center in Chicago, and already the day felt thick with something more than routine. Judge Janelle Monroe sat high behind her bench, gavel resting beside a tall stack of files. At 48, she had earned her reputation: decisive, incorruptible, and with a memory for legal detail that left lawyers double-checking their arguments twice before they stood. No kids. No spouse, no softness as the rumors went. She wasn't feared. She was respected and misunderstood. Today was supposed to be simple, a placement review hearing for a troubled foster child. No decisions were expected. Just notes, signatures, procedure. But something in the air made her glance at the door more than once before the child was even led in. The bailiff cleared his throat. Case number 21947, in re. Malik Davis. The boy entered with the caseworker, shoulders hunched under a pilled grey hoodie that hung from his frame like it had once belonged to someone much larger. He looked like a shadow barely formed. 9 years old. Dark-skinned, slender, silent. Malik sat beside his caseworker, Ms. Lauren Hayes, who adjusted the cuffs of her blazer and placed a hand lightly on his arm. He didn't react. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, cradling something small and folded. His eyes remained forward, unmoving, not scared. Not curious, just still. Judge Monroe flipped open the file. Foster home number 6 in 3 years. Prior placements disrupted due to emotional dysregulation, aggressive outbursts, non-verbal behavior. She paused. The foster parents, David and Susan Caldwell, both in their early 50s and dressed like they were attending a business lunch, sat 2 rows behind Malik. Susan shifted in her seat as Monroe's gaze passed over them. Ms. Hayes, Monroe began, has the child been briefed on today's proceedings? Hayes nodded. Yes, Your Honor, but he hasn't spoken since arriving at the courthouse, same as always. Susan cleared her throat, then stood, clearly unprompted. Your Honor, she said, forcing a smile, we've truly done all we can. Group therapy, school integration, even home visits from behavioral specialists. But he doesn't respond. He barely eats, and when he does speak, it's strange. David added, we're not professionals, we have 2 other children. We took him in to help, but he's not like other kids. Monroe looked at them both, expression flat. You say that like it's an excuse. Susan blinked. I mean, Monroe continued, that what you're describing isn't strangeness. It's trauma. He's not unruly, he's hurt. There's a difference. No one spoke. Monroe glanced back at the boy. He hadn't moved. His grip on the small folded paper in his hands was ironclad. She leaned forward slightly. Malik, she said gently, would you like to speak today? He didn't flinch. Ms. Hayes placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're safe here, she whispered. You can say anything. No one will be mad. Seconds ticked by. Silence thickened the room. Just as Monroe looked down at her notes again, Malik's voice sliced through the air like a whisper that carried weight far heavier than volume. She's lying, he said. The courtroom froze. Monroe's head lifted. Who is Malik? His eyes finally met hers. They were dark and direct. She said my mom's dead, he said softly, nodding towards Susan Caldwell. But she's not. Susan looked like she'd been slapped. I never said that. Malik stood up. She said it when she thought I was asleep. She said my kind always end up dead or in jail. Monroe slammed her gavel. Mrs. Caldwell, you will not speak again unless addressed. Malik held up the folded paper. She said I'd never find her, but I did. She was on the news. She was talking about kids like me. He slowly walked forward, still holding the photo. I remember her voice, he said. She used to sing to me. I remember a necklace with a blue stone. Monroe stood, something in her chest tight. Malik stopped just before the bench and unfolded the paper. It was a worn, faded photograph. In it, a much younger Judge Monroe, barely recognizable under hospital lighting, held a wrapped newborn in her arms. She wasn't smiling. She was crying. The courtroom didn't breathe. I didn't forget, Malik said. You're my mom. Janelle Monroe felt her knees nearly give out. She looked at the photo, at herself. She'd never seen it. Not once. A nurse had told her 9 years ago, during an emergency delivery, that her baby hadn't survived. She'd been unconscious for hours. Sedated after a hemorrhage. They gave her no funeral, no body. No questions, just a certificate, just silence. She stepped down slowly from the bench. The air had gone electric. Where did you get this? She asked, voice barely audible. Malik swallowed. A lady at the hospital. Her name was Linda. She smelled like flowers. She gave it to me when I was little. She told me to hide it and said maybe one day it would bring me home. Susan Caldwell shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. Bailiff, remove them from this courtroom, Monroe said without looking back. David protested, but it was drowned out by the sharp creak of chairs and the hum of 100 breaths being held. Monroe knelt. I need you to be honest with me, Malik, she said, her voice trembling now. You say you remember me. You remember that day? He nodded. You were singing. Then they pulled me away. Then the lights. Then Linda? Then foster homes. Monroe blinked back the burn in her eyes. She looked again at the photo. She was cradling a child. No tubes, no machines. No blood, just life. A life they'd told her was lost. I was told you died, she whispered. Malik stepped forward, wrapped his small arms around her shoulders, and whispered into her ear. But I didn't. I just got lost. The room had gone silent, but the walls themselves seemed to shake under the weight of what had just unfolded. Behind them, Ms. Hayes, white as a sheet, slowly lowered her clipboard. The court reporter had stopped typing. Even the bailiff stood stunned. Judge Monroe rose, the photograph still in her hand. Her voice returned, low and firm. This hearing is suspended until further notice. I will meet with the child in private chambers. No changes to his placement will occur until a full investigation is opened. The gavel came down, not with procedure, but with purpose. As the crowd dispersed, one thing became chillingly clear. They thought the black kid was guilty. But he had just opened his mouth and shattered everything. The silence in Judge Janelle Monroe's private chambers was heavier than anything she'd ever felt in a courtroom. Outside, the hallway was alive with murmurs, law clerks, bailiffs, and attorneys buzzing with speculation. But inside, it was just her and Malik. He sat across from her on the edge of a wide leather chair, feet swinging above the floor, hands still wrapped tightly around the photograph like it might disappear if he blinked. Janelle paced, her heels muffled against the carpet. She was trying to breathe evenly, trying to think like a judge, but her thoughts were crashing into each other too fast. How had this happened? How had he ended up in her courtroom? After all these years? She finally sat down, trying to steady her voice. Malik, do you remember who gave you that photo? He nodded. Linda. She worked at the hospital. She had a pin with flowers on her shirt. She said you were special. Janelle nodded slowly. Did she ever say anything else about me? She told me your name once. I didn't believe her. But then I saw you on TV. You were giving a speech. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout, faded, creased, of a news clipping. Judge Janelle Monroe calls for reform in juvenile justice. Her picture was grainy, but clear. She remembered that day. I kept it, he said. I thought maybe one day. She leaned forward, voice thick. Why didn't you say anything sooner? Because they said if I talked, they'd make you disappear. Who said that? He hesitated, then whispered. The woman at the Wilsons, the one who smelled like peppermint. She said they took me from you because you were a problem. And if I made noise, they'd fix the problem again. Janelle swallowed hard. The Wilsons, one of Malik's former placements, were marked in the file as disrupted after reports of emotional regression. No abuse flagged. No follow-up. She made a decision in that moment. I'm going to find out exactly what happened, she said. I don't care how deep this goes. If someone took you from me on purpose, they're going to answer for it. Malik didn't say anything. He just looked at her with a kind of trust that shattered her. Outside the chambers, Assistant District Attorney Miles Kendrick stood waiting, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had prosecuted hundreds of juvenile cases, and though he was known for being tough, he wasn't known for being reckless. He didn't look surprised when she opened the door. He looked angry. You're not recusing yourself? No, Janelle said. Not yet. You're emotionally involved. This kid just called you his mother in open court. That's not just optics, that's a minefield. Which is exactly why I need to stay close. If this is what it looks like, then someone falsified a death certificate, fabricated a medical emergency, and buried a living child in the foster system. If that's true, it's a conspiracy, and it started when I was unconscious. Miles's lips pressed into a hard line. You're sure it's him? No DNA test yet, she admitted. But I know what I felt. I knew the second he spoke. Miles sighed. So what do you need? Everything, she said. Hospital records, birth logs, the full placement file. And get me someone who can trace medical documentation without alerting half the state, quietly. He paused. You think this was targeted? I don't know what it was, she said. But I do know they picked the wrong woman to bury this under a stack of forms. That night, Malik slept in the guest room of Janelle's townhouse. The room had never been used. Neutral greys, clean lines, no signs of a child. But he didn't seem to mind. He lay curled beneath the blanket, the photo tucked under his pillow. Janelle stood outside the door for a long time after he drifted off. The next morning, she woke early. The sun had barely risen. She hadn't slept. She stared at the old hospital bracelet she found in a box at the back of her closet. The name J. Monroe. Date of admission, April 3rd, 2014. Time of delivery, 3:14 a.m. The death certificate was signed the same day, but no body, no autopsy. Just a nurse's apology and a single phone call from a doctor she couldn't even picture. She called Miles again. I need someone from the hospital. Anyone who worked maternity that week. Nurses, janitors. I don't care. Already ahead of you, he said. And I found something. What? That doctor who signed the certificate. Name's Dr. Edwin Green. But he wasn't OB-GYN. He worked administrative. Only got involved in special circumstances. And guess what? What? He's gone. Retired. Vanished 5 years ago. Janelle's stomach turned. You want more? Always. 3 of Malik's previous foster homes were tied to a private agency called Harmony Path, shut down in 2019 for mishandling funds. But here's the kicker. 2 of the homes he cycled through also housed kids whose birth records had inconsistencies. Her throat tightened. You're saying this wasn't a one-off? I'm saying it smells like trafficking. Janelle stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, watching Malik drink orange juice from a too big mug. I want to meet with that agency's former administrator, she said. He died in a car crash, Miles said. But his assistant didn't. She's living in Peoria. I'll get you her address. As the call ended, Malik looked up. Are you scared? She forced a smile. No. Are you? He shrugged. Not anymore. She knelt down beside him. If you ever remember anything else, anything at all, I want you to tell me. Even if it feels small. He nodded, then added, There was a lady. She had red nails and always wore a scarf. She used to hum this song when she thought no one could hear. It was the same one you sang in court when you said the gavel. Her breath caught. I used to sing that when I was pregnant, she whispered. It was a habit. My grandmother taught it to me. He tilted his head. I didn't forget. Neither did she. Back at the courthouse later that morning, Monroe walked into her chambers to find an envelope on her desk. No address, no return. Inside, a single piece of paper. Typed, no signature. You don't want to open a door you can't close. Some things are meant to stay buried. She stared at it, heart hammering. Then she picked up the phone and dialed the number Miles had given her. Ms. Harper, this is Judge Janelle Monroe. I think you used to work at Harmony Path. I need to talk to you. It's about a boy named Malik. And I think you already know why I'm calling. The voice on the other end didn't speak at first. Then softly it said, I was wondering when someone would come knocking. You're not the first parent they tried to erase. Janelle's grip tightened around the phone. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. The drive to Peoria felt longer than the map promised. Flat stretches of highway passed in slow silence, broken only by the low hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional call Janelle took from her burner phone. She didn't want courthouse lines tapped. Not now. Not when she was chasing something too dangerous for email and far too fragile for courtroom whispers. Beside her, Malik sat in the passenger seat, his seatbelt tugged tight across his hoodie. He was watching the sky roll by. Every so often, he would hum that tune again, the lullaby Janelle had sung years ago without ever knowing someone had heard it, remembered it, carried it like a lifeline through years of silence. You okay? She asked, eyes still on the road. He nodded. Do you think she'll remember me? She might, Janelle said. She definitely remembers what happened. They pulled into the cul-de-sac around 4 p.m. The sun was starting to drop, painting the sidewalks in pale gold. The house was a modest ranch with cracked white paint, plastic flower beds, and a faded wind chime that barely moved in the breeze. Kendra Harper answered the door before Janelle could even knock. Early 50s, steel-grey hair pulled back in a fraying bun, and eyes that had seen too much to ever look surprised again. You're the judge, she said, voice flat. And this is Malik. Kendra looked at him, really looked, her mouth tightening. She stepped aside without another word. The living room smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. Piles of old boxes leaned against the far wall, and a framed cross hung crooked over the fireplace. I've been waiting for this day, Kendra said as she sat down across from them. Didn't think it had come from a judge, though. Most people in power looked the other way. Janelle lowered herself into the armchair, heart pounding. Tell me what you know. Kendra exhaled slowly, then pulled an old manila folder from beneath the couch. Harmony Path wasn't just a bad agency. It was a front. They took kids, mostly black and Latino, from young or single parents who couldn't fight back, or wouldn't be believed. Did they falsify records? Every step of the way. Some were listed as abandoned when they weren't. Some were declared dead at birth. They had doctors on payroll, social workers. Judges, too. Janelle's eyes narrowed. Names? Too many, Kendra said. But I remember the ones who made me leave. One of them was a doctor. Dr. Green, I think. The other was a nurse named Nina Wells. She wore red lipstick always, loved peppermint. She was the one who delivered the babies to foster intake. Malik sat up straight. She smelled like peppermint. Kendra turned to him. You remember her? I think she gave me the picture. That sounds like her, Kendra said. She thought she was helping. But she stayed quiet. Janelle leaned forward. Do you know where she is now? She vanished after Harmony Path shut down. But I heard she resurfaced 2 years ago in New Orleans under a different name, Nancy Wallace. She's working at a community clinic. Janelle's pulse quickened. You're sure? Kendra nodded. I wrote it down. I can give you the address. Outside, as the sun sank lower, Janelle stood on the porch with Malik. You okay? She asked again. He stared out at the street, quiet. Then, I think I remember her face now. Nina. Janelle wrapped her arm gently around his shoulder. You're doing great. We're getting closer. Back at the courthouse 2 days later, a storm was already gathering. Someone had leaked part of the transcript from Malik's private testimony, just enough to stir fear in the right offices. Janelle found a sealed envelope on her desk again. No return, no postage. This time it read, Stop digging, or we bury more than your career. She handed it to Miles without a word. He read it and swore under his breath. They're getting desperate, he said, which means we're hitting something real. That afternoon, Janelle called a closed hearing under the pretense of re-evaluating Malik's placement order. She needed to protect him officially now, before someone tried to manipulate the system again. Across the courtroom, Patrick Sloan and Marcy Holt sat stiffly, the couple who had been lined up to take Malik next. Both had glowing resumes, pristine backgrounds. But Janelle had learned to read past surface details. Ms. Holt, she said, are you aware of your agency's involvement in prior fraud investigations? Marcy blinked. I beg your pardon? Harmony Path was your referral agency for 3 prior adoptions. Sloan shifted uncomfortably. We don't control the past of an agency. We just want to help. Janelle's eyes narrowed. And did you know those 3 children were later removed due to behavioral regression and unexplained injuries? The courtroom tensed. That's not in our records, Marcy said quickly. Of course it's not, Janelle replied. Because your records were scrubbed, but mine weren't. Miles stepped forward and handed a folder to the clerk. We have reason to believe these prospective guardians were recruited through a financial incentive program connected to a private adoption broker under federal investigation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Patrick's face turned red. We never hurt anyone. Then you'll have no problem withdrawing your petition, Janelle said. He didn't answer. The silence said enough. She struck the gavel once, firm. Petition denied. Malik Jackson remains under judicial protection until further notice. As the couple left the courtroom, their lawyer fuming behind them, Janelle turned to Miles. Book us a flight to New Orleans, she said. I'm done waiting. That night, Malik sat at the kitchen table, scribbling with crayons. He held up a new drawing. It was of a house, his house. In the window, a woman in a robe. Outside, a boy with a smile. It's you and me, he said. But I made you taller. Janelle laughed through the tears that stung her eyes. That's okay. I always wanted to be 6 feet. He looked serious suddenly. Do you think we'll ever find them? The ones who made it all happen? She knelt beside him. We're going to find every last one, she said. And we're going to make sure no one forgets what they did. He nodded. Then, for the first time since he'd come into her life, Malik reached out and took her hand first. And Janelle Monroe knew, in that quiet, impossible moment, that the story wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about truth, and they were just getting started. The drive into New Orleans was soaked in grey mist, the kind that curled against windows and whispered secrets no one wanted to admit they'd heard. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the city sensed what was coming. Janelle and Malik arrived just past noon. She'd arranged to meet someone who claimed to have seen Nina under a new name at a community health clinic near Mid-City. Malik sat in the back seat this time, headphones on but volume low. He wasn't listening to music. He was listening to them, her and Miles, speak in hushed tones about the names on a growing list, the web that seemed to stretch far beyond what they'd imagined. Her alias checks out, Miles said, tapping a file. Nancy Wallace. Changed her name legally in Louisiana 6 years ago. No social presence, no online photos, but she's still licensed. Janelle parked 2 blocks from the clinic. Let me go in first. No, Malik said firmly. She gave me that photo. If she remembers me, she might tell the truth. Janelle hesitated. Then nodded. You stay close. The clinic was smaller than expected, squeezed between a laundromat and an old barber shop. A fading sign read, Bayou Family Wellness. Inside, the waiting room smelled of antiseptic and cinnamon candles. A receptionist looked up, uninterested, until she saw Malik. He stepped forward, nervous but composed. I'm looking for Mrs. Nancy Wallace. She's in the back. You got an appointment? No, Janelle said as she stepped beside him. But it's important. The receptionist stared at her for a second too long, then buzzed the door. End of the hall. Last room. They moved quickly. The hallway lights flickered. As they approached the last door, it creaked open on its own. A woman stood there, clipboard in hand, pale blue scrubs, hair pinned back. She froze the moment her eyes landed on Malik. Her lips parted. Oh my God. You remember me, Malik said. The clipboard fell from her hands. Inside the room, she didn't deny it. Nancy, Nina Calloway, sat across from them on a plastic chair, hands trembling, eyes sunken with years of silence. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said, voice barely audible. I used to dream you made it out. Why didn't you stop it? Janelle asked, holding back the rage in her throat. I tried, Nina whispered, but when I asked questions, they sent me away. I lost my job. My sister, she worked in records, disappeared 6 months after refusing to alter paperwork. I was next. Who were they? Miles asked from the doorway. Nina swallowed hard. Harmony Path wasn't just an agency, it was a network. Funded through private medical grants, offshore adoption firms. They funneled kids who had good optics, young, healthy, mostly black or Latino. They preyed on mothers without strong legal support. And Malik, Janelle said. I was there when he was born, Nina replied. His mother didn't die. She was sedated. They told her he didn't survive, told me to take him straight to intake, but something felt wrong. So you gave him the photo, Malik said. She nodded. I kept one, tucked it under his blanket before the driver picked him up. I thought, maybe one day. You kept records? Miles asked. Nina's hands curled into fists. They took everything. But I made copies. I have files hidden. If I give them to you, I need protection. You'll get it, Janelle said. But this time, you don't get to disappear. Later that night, they met Nina in a motel on the outskirts of town. She handed over a worn briefcase with duct tape on one corner. Inside were folders, names, signatures, payout ledgers. Some files showed judges' signatures. Others were medical discharge reports labeled stillborn for children who had later resurfaced in foster care under different names. Malik sat in the corner, holding one photo. A little girl with curly hair and a strawberry birthmark on her cheek. I remember her, he said. She used to cry a lot. Then she was just gone. Janelle leaned over his shoulder. We'll find her. The next morning, Janelle returned to Chicago with the briefcase and a signed affidavit from Nina. She contacted the DOJ and arranged a meeting with an assistant U.S. attorney. What they had was no longer speculation. It was a pattern, documented, deliberate, and far-reaching. But the system was beginning to rumble. When she arrived at her office, her door had been left slightly ajar. A single envelope sat on her desk. This one wasn't typed. It was handwritten, the ink shaky, almost rushed. They know. You're not safe. Neither is he. Stop now. Janelle folded the note without reacting. Then she turned to Miles. Put us under full protection. Rotate agents. I want eyes on Malik 24/7. Miles didn't argue. And Nina? She's moving into federal custody today. Do you trust her? Janelle hesitated. I trust what she kept. I trust what she risked. That's enough for now. That evening, Malik stood at her doorway. Why do they want to stop us? Because truth costs power, she answered, and they've held both for too long. He stepped inside, quiet. Can I ask you something? Anything. If I forget again, if they try to make me forget, will you remind me who I am? Janelle knelt, meeting his eyes. I won't let them touch you. And if you ever lose your way, I'll be the one waiting with the truth. Malik nodded. Then, after a long silence, he whispered, You already are. That night, for the first time since the beginning, Janelle didn't dream of files or names or courtrooms. She dreamed of a courtroom going still, and one voice finally heard. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was unusually tense for a Friday morning. Security was doubled at the front entrance. Inside, courtroom 6C had been cleared of its docket. No trials. No hearings, just one sealed emergency session, called by Judge Janelle Monroe under judicial authority. Officially, it was a protective order review. Unofficially, it was the moment they'd been racing toward for weeks. Malik sat beside Janelle at the counsel's table, his feet just brushing the floor. Dressed in a navy sweater and slacks, he looked more like a kid on picture day than the boy who had cracked open a decades-old conspiracy. But his eyes were sharp, focused, unshaken. Across the courtroom, a pair of foster care representatives from the Division of Child Services sat stiffly, flanked by legal counsel. One of them was familiar, Karen Westbrook, the same case manager who had overseen Malik's placement 3 years ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she shifted a file in her lap. Behind them, a quiet gallery of invited observers sat scattered among the pews. DOJ officials, a representative from the Inspector General's office, a senior agent from the FBI, and Miles Kendrick, pacing just outside the door, waiting for his cue. Janelle looked down at the boy beside her. You don't have to say anything, Malik. You already did more than anyone expected. I want to, he said simply. She gave a small nod and stood, her voice calm but filled with quiet fire. This hearing is to review the circumstances of Malik Davis's foster placements, specifically any actions taken by agents of the Department of Child Services and its contractors that may have violated state or federal law. The opposing counsel, a grey-haired man with a polished tie and a practiced smirk, stood. Your Honor, we request to postpone until we can properly review the new evidence. Denied, Janelle said flatly. You've had long enough. Karen Westbrook rose, voice shaking. I only did what the paperwork told me. There were no red flags. Harmony Path was cleared at the time. Janelle's voice dropped an octave. Do you remember what you told this boy in 2020 when he cried, asking if he had a mother? Karen blinked rapidly. I don't recall. Malik stood. He didn't raise his voice, but it sliced through the room like glass. She told me I was a system kid, that system kids don't have real moms, just placements. Like I was a problem to solve, not a person. Whispers stirred in the gallery. Janelle didn't stop him. She told me if I asked questions, I'd lose everything. She said the people who gave birth to kids like me didn't want them. Karen turned pale. I never said those exact... But you did, Malik said. You whispered it. When you thought I was asleep. The DOJ representative leaned in toward the FBI agent beside her. Janelle caught the movement but kept going. I'd like to introduce new evidence into the record, she said, signaling Miles, who entered with a red envelope and placed it on the judge's bench. Inside are documents recovered from a private storage unit in New Orleans, files kept by Nina Calloway, formerly known as Nurse Nancy Wallace. She opened the envelope and began laying out documents one by one. A falsified birth certificate, an unregistered placement form, a forged medical discharge summary signed by a Dr. Edwin Green, who had been retired 2 years before Malik's supposed stillbirth. Opposing counsel objected, but it was already too late. The room was shifting. No longer a question of if this happened, but how far it went. Janelle pointed to a grainy photo, a newborn baby being held by a nurse, time-stamped and tagged to a patient under Monroe's name. That child didn't die. He was taken, renamed, and funneled into a system designed to erase him. Karen sank into her seat, visibly shaking. The court recognizes the credible evidence of systemic fraud and judicial misconduct, Janelle continued. We are also issuing an emergency protection order for Malik Davis under federal supervision, pending further investigation into all agencies involved. Malik's hand tightened around the arm of his chair, but his eyes never left Karen's. Janelle paused. Before we adjourn, Malik has requested to speak. There was a long silence. Then he stood again. You all thought I wouldn't remember. You thought if you gave me a new name and enough bad dreams, I'd stop asking. He looked around the room, at the agents, the lawyers, the people who had never seen him as anything more than a file number. But I didn't forget. I remembered her voice. I remembered my name, and I remembered how it felt when nobody believed me. He turned to Janelle. But she did. And now, I believe me too. The gallery was still. No coughing, no rustling. Just the sound of something old breaking, something brittle and cruel that had survived too long in silence. Janelle nodded once. This court is adjourned. After the hearing, as the gallery emptied and reporters buzzed in the halls outside, Janelle knelt beside Malik on the courtroom floor. You did more than I ever could have done alone. He looked at her. Are they going to jail? Some of them already are. The rest. We're not done yet. Miles stepped into the room, holding a phone. The DOJ wants a full hearing in D.C. Nina's testimony is being scheduled. They want you both there. Malik's eyebrows rose. Like, to talk. To show the world what happened, Janelle said. He smiled, just a little. Okay, I can do that. Later that night, Back home, Malik sat at the kitchen table with a spiral notebook open in front of him. He was drawing something simple. Two stick figures standing beneath a gavel-shaped sun. One had a robe. The other had big eyes and a tiny, determined smile. Janelle walked in with Coco. "What's that?" He looked up. "That's us." The day they listened. Janelle Monroe felt something shift inside her, deep and permanent. Not just as a judge, not even just as a mother, but as a witness to truth, to the moment a child no one believed stood up in court and changed everything. The morning Malik and Janelle flew to Washington, D.C., the sky over Chicago was the color of iron. Clouds hung low and heavy, the kind of weather that warned you everything was about to change. Janelle barely spoke on the way to the airport, her mind running in loops. Malik sat beside her in the back of the black SUV, quietly watching raindrops race each other across the window. He broke the silence with a single question. "Are they gonna believe me?" Janelle looked at him and saw not a scared boy, but a witness carrying something too big for his age. She reached over, resting a hand over his. "They'll believe you because the truth is louder than anything they've got left." At the federal courthouse in D.C., the security process was different, stricter. The kind of scrutiny reserved for people about to set a system on fire. Inside, agents from the Department of Justice, child welfare reform committees, and 2 U.S. senators were already seated. This wasn't a trial. It was a private congressional inquiry, a formal hearing to determine how far the cover-up reached and what federal action needed to follow. Janelle had been asked to present first. But they all knew the voice they came for wasn't hers. Malik sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, facing rows of lawmakers, his feet swinging beneath the seat. The room settled as the lead senator leaned forward. "You understand, Malik, that what you say today may change federal policy. Are you ready for that responsibility?" Malik nodded slowly. "I'm ready." "Because someone needs to remember what happened." Janelle watched him, holding her breath. He began quietly, but with a clarity that cut through the tension. "When I was little, they told me my mom died. Then they said I never had one. Then they said I was too broken to be loved. But none of that was true." He reached into his backpack and pulled out the laminated photo, the one Nina Calloway had secretly placed with him all those years ago. He held it up. "This is my mother. She didn't give me up." "She didn't leave me. They took me." Gasps rippled through the hearing room. He went on, describing in painful detail the foster homes, the whispered threats, the locked closets, the punishment for speaking. And then, the day he saw Judge Monroe on television, and something inside him remembered. I didn't know her name, but I remembered her voice. Her song, and when I saw her in court, I knew I found my way back. The lead senator, a woman with salt and pepper hair and a reputation for being unshakable, blinked hard. "Malik," she asked, voice steadier than her eyes, "do you know how many children went through the same agency you did?" He shook his head. "Nearly 200. Many of them were labeled as abandoned or stillborn. A significant portion were placed in homes that received money through shell non-profits. We believe this was a for-profit operation masked as child protection." Malik didn't blink. "Then they lied to more than just me." After his testimony, the room stayed quiet for a full minute. Then Janelle stood. "I want the record to show that these children weren't lost. They were taken. This was not a clerical error." "It was a machine, and it operated with impunity for over a decade." She handed over the briefcase Nina Calloway had risked everything to preserve. "Inside are original intake forms, forged medical records, and payout ledgers. You'll find names, judges, doctors, even elected officials. Later, in the hall outside the chamber, Janelle leaned against the wall, exhausted. Her hands were shaking. Malik came up beside her, holding a plastic badge that read, "Visitor, Congressional Witness." "You were amazing," she said. "So were you." "I was just the translator," she said softly. "You were the truth." That afternoon, as agents began issuing subpoenas based on the contents of the briefcase, and a federal prosecutor began drafting the language for a criminal indictment, Janelle and Malik slipped away to the National Mall. It was his idea. They stood quietly under the shadow of the Lincoln Memorial. "This is where people go when they want to change things, right?" he asked. She smiled. "Yeah, people come here when they want to be heard." "I want kids like me to have somewhere like this someday," he said, "where the system listens before it hurts." That evening, back at the hotel, a knock came at the door. Miles Kendrick stood in the hallway, his suit wrinkled and tie half undone, holding a manila folder in his hand. "They moved fast," he said. 3 arrests already." One of them was Karen Westbrook. Janelle took the file and scanned the names. "And Dr. Green?" she asked. "Still off grid," Miles said. "But Nina just made a second statement. She remembered a private compound used for undocumented placements." "It wasn't a clinic. It was a holding house. The FBI's mobilizing now." She nodded. "We're not done." "No," Miles agreed. "But we just pulled the thread, and the whole thing's starting to unravel." That night, Malik didn't sleep much. Neither did Janelle. At 2:17 a.m., he knocked on the connecting door between their rooms. She opened it to find him holding his spiral notebook. "I couldn't stop drawing," he said. Inside were pages of sketches, children in courtrooms, holding signs that said, "I remember." A judge standing between 2 buildings labeled Truth and System. One page had a circle of kids holding hands. In the center, Malik had written, "We are not lost." Janelle sat beside him on the edge of the bed, flipping through the drawings, stunned silent. "These aren't just drawings," she whispered. "They're blueprints." "For what?" he asked. "For what comes next." As the night wore on, Janelle didn't return to bed. She stayed up making notes, drafting plans, writing names on a legal pad under the title, National Coalition for Foster Truth. This wasn't just about fixing Malik's past anymore. It was about changing the future. The city buzzed under a blanket of anticipation. By the time Janelle Monroe walked back into her chambers at the Cook County Courthouse, 2 federal agents were stationed outside her door, and her inbox had ballooned with requests from media, legal watchdogs, former caseworkers, and, heartbreakingly, dozens of parents who now questioned what had really happened to their children. But it wasn't the noise that unsettled her. It was what came next. Inside, Malik sat at her desk, reading a letter. He looked up, eyes focused. "It's from a girl named Serenity," he said quietly. "She saw the hearing. She thinks we might be siblings." Janelle blinked. "Siblings?" "She said she remembers the song." "The one I hummed at the hearing, and she has a photo like mine, the same necklace." Janelle's pulse ticked in her ears. "Where is she?" "Milwaukee. She's still in the system, living with a foster family flagged last year for placement violations." "She wrote the letter herself." He held it up, a crumpled page written in purple ink with jagged cursive and a smudge of what looked like tears. "They said you don't exist," the last line read. "But I remember your laugh. Don't forget me." Janelle took a slow breath. "We need to get her out." Miles entered behind her, holding a sealed file. "You might want to sit for this one," he said. She stayed standing. "They confirmed it." Serenity Williams, born at Lakeside Medical Center 3 months before Malik. Delivered by the same night nurse, Nina Calloway. Same forged stillbirth record, same referral pipeline to Harmony Path. Only difference. Her original file listed a sibling match, male, removed from record a week later. Janelle blinked. They knew they were related and split them. They scrubbed the connection before placement, Miles said. Made it impossible for anyone to link them, until now. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. It could have been coincidence. But it felt like warning. Janelle turned to Malik. You remember her? He nodded, slower this time. We were little, but I remember she used to squeeze my hand when I got scared. We're getting her, Janelle said. An emergency petition was filed by noon, bypassing the state system altogether and pushing it straight into federal review. The DOJ fast-tracked the order under the justification of suspected fraud and endangerment. That night, Janelle and Miles drove to Milwaukee themselves. They didn't notify the local agency until they were already parked outside the house. When they arrived, they found Serenity on the front porch, wearing an oversized sweater and clutching a plastic bag with her belongings already packed. I saw the news, she said as Janelle stepped out of the car. I knew you were coming. Malik climbed out of the back seat. He stopped in front of her, unsure for a second. She didn't wait. Serenity dropped her bag and threw her arms around his neck. They both cried without sound. Inside the car on the way home, Janelle watched them in the rearview mirror. They sat shoulder to shoulder, staring out the window, each with one hand holding the other's. You think there are more? Serenity asked. Malik answered before Janelle could. I think we're just the start. Back in Chicago, things were no longer just unfolding. They were unraveling. The files Nina had provided led to an unregistered facility in Iowa, meant to be a temporary medical respite home, but functioning more like a black site orphan intake. Dozens of children had been passed through it before being renamed, refiled, and placed in homes or private education camps. Janelle called a press conference on courthouse steps the next morning. She stood not as a judge, but as a mother, a protector. What began as one boy's voice is now hundreds, she told the cameras. This is no longer just an investigation. It's a reckoning. Her voice cracked slightly. They thought Malik was guilty because of his silence. But that silence was survival. And now, his truth is setting an entire generation free. By afternoon, over 20 court orders were issued to seize records from regional child welfare offices. 3 former agency heads were indicted. And the Senate launched a formal hearing into privatized adoption pipelines. But as victories stacked, so did threats. That evening, while Malik and Serenity colored at the dining table, Janelle stepped onto her porch to find an envelope taped to her mailbox. No note, just a photograph. It was her. And Malik, at the courthouse, marked with a red X. She stared at it for a long moment before walking inside and locking every door. Miles arrived 10 minutes later, breath short. We found Green, he said. He's in New Mexico, operating under an alias. Janelle didn't flinch. I want him brought in. Alive. Malik looked up from his drawing. Who is he? The one who started it all, Janelle said. The doctor who signed your death. Serenity tilted her head. Then he's the one who owes us the most. That night, Janelle sat on her bed, reviewing every file, every name. Then she opened a fresh legal pad. At the top, she wrote 2 words. Final statement. She knew this case wasn't just about fighting back. It was about telling the truth so loudly, so relentlessly, that even those who'd spent years trying to silence it would be forced to listen. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was justice, on their terms. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago buzzed with a tension that couldn't be measured in decibels, but in glances, in sharp exhales, in the way the press leaned forward like dominoes waiting to fall. It was the final hearing, public, televised, and standing room only. The Justice Department had officially charged 7 former executives tied to Harmony Path, 2 physicians, and 3 foster placement officers. More indictments were pending, but today wasn't about that. Today was about truth. Judge Janelle Monroe stood just outside courtroom 4A, her robe pressed, her heart a fist inside her chest. Malik stood beside her, dressed in a dark blue suit with a silver pin Serenity had given him that morning. It was shaped like a compass. "You ready?" she asked him. Malik nodded. "Yeah, but I want to go first." "Are you sure?" He gave a small smile. "It started with my voice." "It should end with it." Inside, the room hushed as the clerk announced, "The court is now in session. In re, United States v. Green et al." At the front sat the accused, Dr. Edwin Green, now grayer and sunken but still defiant, Karen Westbrook, the former child welfare supervisor who had shredded placement records, and Philip Mercer, the judge whose rushed approvals had fed the machine. Cameras rolled. Reporters scribbled. And Malik walked, not timidly, but like someone who had crossed fire and come out forged. "My name is Malik Davis," he said clearly. "I was listed as an orphan. A ward of the state, a broken kid, but none of those things were true. I had a mother, I had a name, and I was taken." He turned toward the defendants. "You told people I was damaged, that I couldn't be placed, that I didn't belong anywhere. You made money off my silence, but I found my voice." His hand tightened around the compass pin. "And I'm not the only one." "There are kids in this room right now, some grown, some still in foster homes, who remember more than you think, who are starting to speak." He looked back toward the bench. "I don't want revenge. I want truth. I want the world to know what happened so it never happens again." A quiet, rippling wave of applause rose before the judge struck her gavel once. Then Janelle stepped forward. This time, not as a mother or witness, but as a judge holding a verdict bigger than any sentence. What happened to Malik, and to countless others, was not a system failure, she said. It was a system functioning exactly as it was designed, prioritizing profit and paperwork over people. Today, that ends. She read out the new measures being enacted. Mandatory federal tracking of all birth to foster transitions. Criminal penalties for falsified stillbirth records. A nationwide review of sealed adoptions from flagged agencies. The creation of the Children's Truth and Protection Task Force. And then she paused. "I was once told my child had died," she said, voice steady. "I was told to grieve and move on, but grief has a memory, and my son had a voice." She turned to Malik, then to Serenity sitting in the gallery with dozens of others now reunited. "And because he used that voice, a nation started listening." When court adjourned, the hallway exploded with questions. Reporters pressed forward, microphones raised. Janelle stepped to the podium outside and raised her hand. "I'll take one question," she said. A woman shouted, "Judge Monroe, what's next?" Janelle looked at Malik and Serenity. "We build. We heal. And we never, ever stay silent again." Malik stepped up beside her. "And we find the ones still out there," he added. "Because if you remember, you're not lost. You're on your way home." That night, in the small kitchen of Janelle's house, they celebrated not with champagne, but with pancakes. Malik insisted. Serenity made too much batter. Miles sat with his sleeves rolled up, laughing for the first time in weeks. On the table sat a fresh notebook. Malik flipped it open. Page 1 had a single sentence. Let every kid speak. Janelle took a photo of him writing it, his fingers stained with syrup, his eyes wide open to a future he now believed in. Before bed, Serenity stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Can I say something weird?" she asked. "Always," Janelle said. "I don't think we're done." Janelle smiled. "We're not." "Good," Serenity said. "Because this time, we get to be the ones writing the story." To everyone watching this story, if you were moved, if you felt the weight of Malik's silence and the power of his truth, then help us amplify it. Click like, subscribe, and share this video, because somewhere out there, another voice is still waiting to be heard, and maybe your share will help bring them home.